like the music?
I love it.
Good. It sets the tone. Greetings. Welcome to ITR Live. I'm your host, Chris Hagenow. We're here for another action-packed, fun-filled episode of Iowa politics and fiscal conservatism. So I have to come clean at the outset today with an apology. Is that we had a couple weeks ago, we had an episode where we had Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitver in here. And I marketed that as the first time we'd had an in-studio guest here at ITR Live. And that was incorrect because we now have our first returning guest, which is Alan Ostergren from Kirkwood Institute. And so Alan's back again today. So welcome, Alan.
I appreciate it, Chris. I was not overly offended. I do have a cease and desist letter I'm going to drop off with you, but we'll work past it. Yeah. We'll leave here as friends.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Don't mess with Alan. Good. Well, kicking things off, you're a Bears fan. I'm sorry, but how you feeling about things this year?
You know what? I got really mad at the Bears last season, and I was in a funk, and I decided I was going to go back to my roots. I mean, I grew up in Central Illinois. Fond memories of the '85 Bears going to the Super Bowl Shuffle. I mean,
I owned the cassette tape of that.
What an iconic team! Jim McMahon, the Fridge, Walter Payton, Richard Dent, all those players. And so I decided I was going to try and fall in love with this new young team. And they're sometimes a little hard to watch. They make mistakes. I think Justin Fields is a exciting player. And I think with some coaching and some development, he's going to be a great quarterback in the league. I was thrilled that they beat the Patriots Monday night. I have to say I was a little surprised by that. I was at another event and tuned into the game a little bit late and was pleased to see that they were doing well and ended up winning. And, they're fun to watch. Yeah. They desperately need a new stadium. Trish and I went to the season opener at Soldier Field, which is a dump, and the Bears organization needs a new stadium and needs to leave the riverfront and have a new park.
So you're advocating for a bunch of Illinois taxpayer dollars to go towards a new stadium?
Well, boy, we could get into public policy on stadium finance can be an ugly subject of rent seeking and cronyism. I would love to see.
That never happens in Illinois politics.
No, yes, right. I would love to see a new facility paid for by the owners and the fans and the league, but Illinois being Illinois, I'm sure there's going to be a scheme involved.
Yeah. When I was talking with Senator Whitver after the podcast he was in, he was mentioning a podcast he'd listened to and about how Iowa football fans, at least at the college level, really don't get much offense. They don't get much scoring, but at least a lot of you are Chiefs fans, and you could get your offensive output there. But I'm not sure that that's the case for every NFL.
No, I would say the Chiefs are my favorite AFC team. They are fun to watch, but it's kind of a dry year for some of us here in the middle of the country for sports.
It's rough. Well, turning to some of the reasons that you're here today, we're 12 days out from the election, and there's all the activity and everything. But you were recently, we're focused on Iowa and Iowa politics, but you were recently at a national conference. And what's your experience when you're out on the national circuit and you tell people you're from Iowa?
Yeah, it's kind of exciting. So I was at an event for Heritage Foundation, lawyers working in the public interest space, center-right, libertarian, conservative, lawyers doing public interest cases. And the experience I have in that kind of format is I tell them I'm from Iowa, and the subject of, hey, your governor's great, comes up pretty quickly. And what it tells me is that Governor Reynolds is really, her stock is rising on the national scene, and people are interested to know about her as a person, interested to know, what is making her tick, what is the source of her success, and it's a thrill. I mean, as Iowans, we're used to having a privileged position in politics because of the caucuses, but here it's nice to have it in a way because of policy achievements. The personality of the governor, which I think people understand is terrific. The personality of the governor that people understand is terrific. And I really enjoy being able to tell what the story is of her through the COVID pandemic. I think leading in a strong way, cutting taxes, some of the other policy things.
I think you make a good point, Alan, of her national profile. But what do you specifically attribute to her success on the national stage? Why are people interested in Governor Reynolds?
A theme that we could return to later is COVID was a stress test for everything, every institution, every company, every family, every individual, and certainly every political leader. And I think there's an awareness on the national stage that Governor Reynolds performed very well under that stress test. We put ourselves back to March of 2020, and we all learned where Wuhan, China was and what a pangolin is and all those. You think back to 15 days to flatten the curve and all the things that we were going through at that moment and didn't know. And frankly, the legislature, I think, was content to hand the keys of government to Governor Reynolds and head out of town. And she stepped up. I mean, closing the schools for a few weeks made sense at the beginning, where we had no idea what was going on and had no idea how contagious COVID would be and what the policies were. But then have an immediate pivot to, we're going to reopen school in person, and understanding how parents were getting so frustrated at the failures of the education system, masks and all the mandates, and shutting down the economy. And I think it would have been very, very easy to go along with the groupthink in mid 2020, late 2020. And she didn't do that.
Nope.
And those decisions look pretty good in hindsight. You see where our economy is. You see where the National Assessment of Education Performance, I believe is what it's called, comes out. And across the country, disastrous losses in educational achievement. But in a state like Iowa, we basically stayed where we were. Now we want to be better.
Yeah.
But a generation of Iowa school children did not get abandoned the way they got abandoned around the country by blue state governors and some red state governors. Yeah. Let's be honest. And so I think people understand that, and they see that leadership. And what people respect, I believe, in politics is deep down, they respect somebody who is a leader, who makes decisions based on what that person thinks is right, not what is expedient.
Yep.
And that's why her profile has risen so much.
I think you nailed it. I mean, obviously I want it to be because she's been a leader on tax policy, but that's just part of it, because she believes in that and she leads on it and isn't afraid to advocate for the things she thinks are right. And she's a fighter on those issues. And that resonates across the country. I mean, they see that in this sort of policy world that we operate in nationally. There's a lot of interaction about what's going on in your state. And it is so much fun to tell these people what's going on in Iowa. The leaders we have and the victories that we've secured. And then I think that, I guess what's equally gratifying about that is, okay, so I'm going to pivot back to the elections that we're coming into now, is that we've done these things. We've got a governor that's led and been courageous and fought for these things. And she's getting ready to win a huge election victory. By all accounts, is going to be a wide double-digit margin that she's going to get reelected to be governor on after leading on that conservative agenda.
Right. We need to run through the tape and get your neighbors out, your friends, family, talk to people, communicate with the people in your life about how important this election is. Don't take anything for granted. But you're exactly right. All the data show that this is going to be a historic wave election for Republicans as a referendum on the failures of the left at all levels of government, in all aspects. People understand that the left ideology is magical thinking, that if we just decree that some result should occur, they think it will happen. And what they've left is inflation, breakdown in social disorder, attacks on the family, and this overwhelming feeling that they can't be trusted with power at any level of government. And what that's going to turn into is we'll put this back down in Iowa. We're going to have the 90th General Assembly convene next January. And Kim Reynolds will be officially declared the winner of the election by the General Assembly and take the oath of office. And she will be the most powerful governor probably since Samuel Kirkwood, actually,
there
ironically, for the namesake of my organization. And he helped win the Civil War. So, to be in that league is not too bad at all. And there will almost certainly be an even stronger Republican majority. And more importantly, on an issue that I know that your audience cares about, on school reform, education reform, the makeup of that Republican legislature is going to be ready to make historic achievements in that space. And I think we're going to see the payoff of Governor Reynolds' leadership and conservative values up and down the line when we have some of those reforms. And at the risk of never being invited back to the podcast for an organization that has the word tax in its name, the tax policy achievement that happened this year was extraordinary. Okay. But in terms of lasting legacy, I think the potential for the governor to lead on education reform, I think when somebody writes about the history of this era 50 years from now or 100 years from now, she'll be known for education reform if that gets done. The tax reform will be part of it, okay? And education reform today will lead to tax reform down the road because the vast sums that are wasted on the public school monopoly will be freed up and returned to the taxpayers. But the potential that the governor will have a generational victory on education reform, creating structures of reform in our state that will be very, very hard, if not impossible, to undo. The reality is if the pendulum swung back and Democrats were in charge, we had a Democrat governor, they can just simply raise the flat rate. They can, tax policies can come and go much more easily than the structural changes to our education system.
I think that's right. It's specifically with school choice, once you extend a freedom or an opportunity to someone, that's much more difficult to pull back, for a future legislature, which at this rate would, that pendulum may swing back. It looks like it could be quite a while, but that would be extremely difficult to go back to these families and say, no, not anymore.
Right. We're going to shut down this charter school.
Right.
We're going to shut down this success story over here where with a tiny fraction of the resources, they're getting better educational results. That would be extraordinarily hard to take away. And you don't see around the country places where education reform has been done where it's been undone.
Right.
In any real significant way. And this is why the left fights tooth and nail and uses the most over-the-top dramatic language they can. Eviscerate, destroy. Mm-hmm. Those are the verbs they use to describe education reform, and shows how, frankly, at this point, intellectually bankrupt they are.
Yeah, I agree on all that, Alan. I think you do a great job of articulate it better than we do. I'm just the guy behind the soundboard that presses play, so we need you to come in and kind of frame that up for us, and I appreciate it.
You're a little more modest than you deserve. You and the team here at ITR have been very, very effective. This has been, I think, the best year in the history of this organization, and next year is going to be even more exciting because I know ITR will be engaged on education choice. I know John is studying up on tariff policy from the late 19th century. I'm confident that will have some significant impacts. I felt bad. I heard that podcast where John was talking about his tariff book, and I wanted to have something equally obscure to bring in with me, but I couldn't find my book on admiralty law of the 17th century. So it's somewhere in a box someplace. I was going to bring it in to
I'd like that someday.
Be equally esoteric lawyer.
Well, I did some international law in law school. We could kind of geek out on that for a while.
We could, as I like, and this is not my phrase, but international law is to real law as professional wrestling is to real wrestling.
That's exactly right. There really is almost no such thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, to something a little bit more practical in the legal realm is I saw an article yesterday of a case that you had successfully litigated in Cedar Rapids on behalf of Kirkwood Institute, and share a little bit about about what that was about and how that case fell down.
Sure, and it is still pending. We got an important first step in it, and it looks like the city of Cedar Rapids is going to throw in the towel. So the bottom line is the Constitution of the United States applies everywhere, including in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So we've established that. So the Kirkwood Institute is proud to represent an individual who really neat client, who very engaged in community things, retired guy. The city of Cedar Rapids passed an ordinance to establish the Civilian Police Review Board. The ordinance, which was there was an activist movement, which is fine, that led to that. But one of the demands of some of the activists was that the board would be majority of people of color, that there would be an explicit racial quota in the formulation of the board. And the city of Cedar Rapids said, okay, and wrote in their ordinance that 5 of the 9 members would have to identify as a person of color. Well, you don't have to actually be deeply into the weeds on equal protection and the Constitution to recognize that the government should not be discriminating on the basis of race, that it's unconstitutional to create seats on a board that only people with certain skin color can be appointed to. And so my client has been involved in the community, pointed out to them, hey, that's not legal. The board was formulated. He applied for a spot on the board. And in a moment of candor that maybe the former mayor regrets, former mayor basically told him, well, you weren't selected for the board because we only had 3 spots for the general public. Well, because, my client happens to be white. So we filed a lawsuit in federal court, and we received a preliminary injunction. So this is a order before a final judgment, but the court ordered the city of Cedar Rapids that it could not continue to enforce this racially discriminatory provision in its ordinance. And I saw the other day the city has announced, it's got a new draft of amendment to the ordinance where it's going to strip out that language and recognize that they can't discriminate on the basis of race. And what's important here is the principle that the government should not be in the business of dividing people. And, I think it's important for having scrutiny of what the police do. I spent 22 years in law enforcement, and I would be the first to tell you that we should be supportive and demanding of what law enforcement does all at the same time. Appreciate them for what they do and importance they have in our community, but also hold them to extremely high standards, given the trust that we place in them and the importance of their mission. Well said. But, perpetuating this idea that oversight of police should be a black versus white issue or any other racial minority versus white issue is toxic. And we just need to call it for what it is: vicious, toxic racism.
Well, and I think you made the point in there too, at least in the article that I read about it, that when you create these divisions at the front end on how you establish these boards, you're only increasing that division that you're trying to erase, or that it adds to it, is that we should be doing this neutrally. And that's why the Constitution establishes that. Right.
And, and we have struggled in the law with this idea of what does equal protection mean. And quite frankly, there's cases in the U.S. Supreme Court that are going to be argued next week dealing with racial preferences in higher education admission. There's a case out of Harvard University and a case out of the University of North Carolina. Actually, a lawyer I consider a friend is going to actually be arguing that case in front of the U.S. Supreme Court next week. And it stands for the proposition that the government should not be dividing people up on the basis of race. And that if you look at how race was used in higher education context, for example, the most vicious kind of racial stereotypes in Harvard and UNC cases was really Asian Americans that suffered. And reading the emails, the things that came out in discovery in that case shows how petty and unserious and nasty the racial stereotyping was in order to fulfill somebody's vision of what the student body should look like, rather than getting kids into college who have the capacity to succeed there and will will be great
Right.
students.
Right. Well, it's good. And I think I'm thankful that you're in this space to help secure those rights and the constitutional protections that we need to do this. So, there's my plug for Kirkwood.
KirkwoodInstitute.org.
Yeah. And what you're doing. And, this isn't the only thing you're working on. You got a whole host of these issues that you're working on, and it's great. So, okay, ITR Live listeners, make sure you go to KirkwoodInstitute.org and check it out. Final thought, the article I read, it was pointed out that you're a conservative. I guess that's relevant to the case somehow. And it was pointed out that you are working on the lifting the injunction on the fetal heartbeat bill. That's somehow relevant to racial divisions in the city of Cedar Rapids. So I'm guessing you're not ashamed of those things, but I fail to see how they're relevant to the case at hand. But somehow that's a criticism of you, I suppose.
Well, the author of that article, who's a very experienced, long-time journalist, yes, I mean, he puts it in context, and people can decide if it's relevant. The irony of it is, he wrote an article a while back, questioning, how I get supported and how I do my work and things like that.
I linked to the ITR Live podcast on that article as well.
Yeah. And of course, the Iowa Capital Dispatch receives funding, and there's, there's groups out there that have an agenda, and you know what, read it and see, let the Capital Dispatch articles stand on their own merit, just like let my litigation stand on its own merit, and make your own decision.
Well, and I think that's the beauty of having things decided in the court system, is that we'll just get to decide our argument against their argument, and we'll see where it lands, right? And
Right.
those things should rise or fall on their own merits.
If the response that somebody has, and this isn't a criticism of the journalist, just in general, if the criticism that they have of what I'm doing in court is that I'm conservative, or in another case, I'm trying to advance the cause of protecting unborn life, I think it says more about them than it does me, because if they think that somehow diminishes what we're doing in court, then they don't have any substantive argument on the actual case that we're discussing.
Well said. So, well, Alan, sadly, we're running up, or actually overtime, which is a good thing because we had a lot to cover today. So, you're feeling good about the election? I
am. I will have some collateral legal duties in my private law practice on election night. So it'll be a long night.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be one to celebrate. I hope we get our Republican Attorney General, Brenna Byrd, elected. That would be amazingly great for our state.
Yeah.
And Republican wins up and down the ballot. You can vote early. Go to your auditor's office or look for a satellite voting location. If you mail in your absentee ballot, you need to have it in the hands of the auditor by the close of polls on the day of the election. So go down and vote. I voted down in Polk County. Jamie Fitzgerald does a great job.
He does.
It took me 9 minutes to park, go in, and vote, and that included chatting with the auditor for a couple minutes because he was out and about checking out what was going on. So it's easy to vote, and go do it.
I concur. Jamie does a good job, and I have a lot of confidence and faith in our elections in Iowa.
Yes,
I think they are well administered. I think that voters of both parties should have confidence that their votes count. They'll be counted accurately and fairly, and you have every opportunity to go out and vote and have your voice heard. So another plug for how great Iowa is, which I'm intent on doing on this podcast, is celebrating the things that are great in the state of Iowa. So with that all having been said, we'll wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Chris. It's always a pleasure.
We're going to have you in more often. At least that's what you keep promising me. So
I will.
Good. Well, don't forget to like and subscribe. Give us a 5-star review, whatever it is out there that's available to you. And we certainly appreciate it. Don't forget to share it with your friends. And we will see you next time on ITR Live.